the pain of, you know, that truck not starting in the morning, breakdowns in icy conditions, cold conditions, and just not being able to run your operation properly due to the inclement weather, which is upon us here in Northeast Ohio, at least. And, you know, most of the country, we're starting to cool down. So we just kind of want to get in front of it, help you guys get in front of it. They have a short presentation, and if you just want to hold all questions at the end, they're going to have an open Q&A session. So they'll be happy to take your questions at that time. And with that being said, Chris and Aaron, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jess. Again, I'm Aaron Chamberlain, and I'm with Chris DeSantis. We're both based here at our Corporate Support Center in Girard, Ohio. Our contact information is on the screen right now. And each year we take measures to ensure that we're prepared for the winter season. We're going to highlight a checklist that we've created, as well as review some best practices that can help you be prepared as well. In our locations, we've distributed driver's cards. These are also saved electronically by all managers. We'll ask Jess to send this out at the end of the presentation as well. So we're going to go through each step on this card and individually, and again, take some questions at the end. Chris?
This is talk about starting the equipment procedure. I know it seems pretty simple, but it gets a little bit different when it's in the winter months. Most of your drivers don't know there's a air intake heater on most units nowadays. It pre-warms the cylinders. So when they turn the unit on, they're going to want to wait for at least 60 seconds for that preheat cycle to go before they start cranking the engine. It'll warm the cylinder, it'll warm the fuel, cause cranking to go much easier for them. Another thing that'll cause cranking to go easier for them is, even though the unit may be in neutral, and most units they have a neutral safety switch, all of them do, you really want to push that clutch pedal down while you're cranking the engine, because even though the unit's in neutral, all the gears in the transmission are still spinning, so you're trying to spin that 50 weight oil in the transmission as well as the engine and everything else. It's very cold out in the winter, so always pushing down the clutch is a good idea. And you really don't want to crank the engine for more than 15 seconds. If it doesn't start in 15 seconds, it's probably not going to. We like you to cycle the key back off, let the air intake heater run again, pre-warm the cylinders again, and crank it another 15 seconds. You do that 3 times. And at that point, if it doesn't start in 3 times, it's probably not going to at that point. So at that point, what we want you to do is stop and call and ask for help. Because if you stop and call and ask for help at that point, by the time a technician shows up, the only problem he has to fight at that point is why the unit wouldn't start in the first place. But if we continue to crank the vehicle until the batteries are dead, then the technician who arrives has two problems to try and solve. One, trying to get the batteries back up so they can crank the engine, and secondly, trying to figure out why the unit would not start in the first place. So it's always a good idea after 3 crank attempts to stop, call, ask for help. When the technician comes out, he can figure out why the unit didn't start in the first place. We're not trying to solve 2 issues. We're only trying to take care of 1 issue at a time. So just good common sense practices for when you're trying to crank the engine over and start the equipment. The next step in our Operation Snowflake card talks about block heaters. If you're unaware of what a block heater is, that is a thermostatic heater that plugs into a 110 outlet, and it sits in the coolant jacket of the engine to keep the coolant warm in the engine. So therefore, if the coolant's warm in the engine, it keeps the block warm, keeps the oil warm, and it'll help start the unit because the oil will be warm and we can crank the unit engine over easily. The block heater is designed to be plugged in when you bring the unit back at the end of the day while the engine is still hot. If it's there to maintain that block temperature. It's not designed to take a cold engine and warm it up. It cannot do that. It's not designed to do that, but it is designed to keep a warm engine warm, and that's what we want to do. When the driver comes in at the end of the day, if we can get that unit plugged in, that's fantastic, and that'll definitely help starting the unit the next morning. One thing about block heaters, they do draw a lot of amperage, all right? Your typical Class 8 vehicle, you know, your big bore Detroits, your big bore Cummins, Volvos, all those different engines, That block heater is 1,500 watts. So in a 120 volt system, that's a 12.5 amp draw. Most outlets are only rated at 15 or 20 amps. So, you know, if you have a double outlet, you're still only going to be able to plug one truck into that outlet and expect it to work without tripping a circuit breaker someplace else. My greatest suggestion is, if you're going to buy extension cords and put them out there, is you buy the lighted ones. So that way when you plug in the extension cord, you know there's not a circuit breaker tripped inside the building. The cord lights up, you know it's good, and you know you're putting power into the truck at that time. Of course, now during October is the best time to walk outside, plug something into those outlets and make sure they all work. They're ready to go. If you have old cords, make sure they're not frayed or anything like that, because if they are laying out in the water, that's a bad thing too. Of course, in some cases, when it gets really cold out, leaving the unit run is sometimes the best. When we're getting down below 0, -5, -10, sometimes letting the unit run. Also, you know, a good common safety practice is when you do plug the unit in, because most units plug in right below the driver door. If you take that extension cord, you wrap it around the driver mirror, it's kind of a signal to the driver to make sure that he unplugs that when he comes up to the unit, so that he knows the unit's plugged in, so he doesn't try and back away with the block heater plugged in and, you know, stretch out that cord and cause some type of electrical flash or something along those lines. And also, one thing that's not wrote up there is they should unplug the block heater before they start cranking the unit, because the block will be warm, but the coolant in the radiator is not warm. So if that cold radiator coolant gets to the block heater, it can short it out and prevent the block heater from working the next time you come in. So from a block heater perspective, they're great starting aids. So a couple quick tips there to make sure that you're prepared, use the right cords, and make sure, you know, you have enough outlets available on cords before the weekend when it gets cold out.
Thanks, Chris. So the air systems. Water can be very problematic in the air system, and that is amplified by freezing temperatures. Moisture is automatically in the air, and draining tanks, along with a properly serviced air dryer, will prevent most of the issues. Sorry about that. To my point, the tanks do need to be drained daily, and any excess water should be reported to a service department, because any frozen water or ice in the air system affects more than just the brakes. It affects other components such as transmissions, whether manual or automated. They use air actuation, and those components will not work properly with ice in them.
Probably one of the biggest issues is fuel and fuel gelling that we see when the temperatures get really cold outside. Fuel gelling happens in normal number diesel fuel that you use all summer long, about 15 degrees above 0. So anytime we start getting below 15 degrees, we need to treat the fuel, because at 15 degrees, it starts to gel or cloud. And if you see the picture in the bottom right-hand corner, that's a fuel filter with gelled diesel fuel going through it. And obviously fuel's not going to flow through that, and we're not going to start the unit. Ames started blending their fuel October 1st, so we'd be ready for winter. You know, so if you're fueling in an AIM location, that's great. Your fuel's blended that you've been buying. If you're not fueling in an AIM location, make sure you're starting to buy blended fuel at this time. There's a couple different terms out there for blended fuel. There's number 1 fuel, which is basically straight kerosene. You can get number 2 fuel that is blended, and it can be blended 2 different ways. If you say on the pump that you're buying from that it's a winter blend, that would mean that it's diluted with kerosene to help the pour point. It can also be called winterized fuel, and if it's winterized fuel, that means they've put an additive in the fuel. If If you're running your own vehicles, you're going to want to buy the number 2 with the additive, because with common rail fuel systems nowadays, there's not a manufacturer out there that recommends using kerosene in their engine. They want you to use some type of additive winterized fuel, and the winterized additive is less expensive than using kerosene anyway, so it is the best choice, and that's the choice that we use. So we want to prevent clouding of the fuel. At our locations, we stock power service that we could sell you for your fuel. We stock in 2 different sizes. We stock a 16-ounce size for your smaller fuel tanks like your Isuzus and your straight trucks, treats about 40 gallons of fuel. We also stock a 32-ounce size for treating a 100-gallon fuel tank. And, you know, how much you use depends on the temperature that it's going to be outside, and whether you have blended fuel in your tanks to start or whether you have unblended fuel in your tanks to start. You know, if you're buying blended fuel and you want to put a little shot in, just put 1 can per tank. And that's great. If you're not buying, if your fuel in your truck happens to be unblended, and you're probably going to want to put at least 2 bottles in. There is a product out there called 911 Dethaw. If your fuel does gel, that will, excuse me, in extreme conditions, ungel the fuel in the tanks and hopefully get your unit running. One thing that tends to happen at the beginning of the season is, you know, people have been buying fuel that has been unblended, and they got a half a tank of fuel. They pop in someplace and buy blended fuel and assume because they put 100 gallons of blended fuel in with their 100 gallons of unblended fuel that the fuel in the tanks are blended and ready to go. If they're not, you're probably going to need additive to that. And if your trucks are coming back from the south, it's also very important. If they, you know, bought fuel in Alabama, it's probably not blended fuel in the winter. And if they're coming back to Ohio, they're either going to need to add additive to it or purchase fuel that's blended when they get back, so that you guys have blended fuel in your tanks. The number 1 issue we do have is, you know, blended or fuel gelling in the wintertime due to fuel issues. So a little preventative thought process will go a long way. And when you're looking at that, the temperature outside, when it comes to fuel, it's not just the ambient temperature that's outside. You have to add the wind temperature in for that fuel to make sure it's treated for the ambient temperature as well, all the way down through what the wind temperature would be for that day.
I'm going to call him right now and tell him.
Just tell us just.
So stocking supplies in preparation for the worst. The opportunity is reduced for issues when you're executing on a thorough preventative maintenance program, and that you're being proactive with these steps that we've outlined so far. But you do need to be prepared for those breakdown type situations, or when your unit will not start. Having extra items with you, such as water, food, blankets, coats, gloves, boots, a phone charger, anything else that you may find appropriate, could be beneficial when you find yourself in what could be an emergency situation. Your driver's physical well-being is of utmost importance. So think ahead, plan for the winter. Again, it's October right now, but it'll be January before we know it, and sub-zero temperatures. So be prepared.
And like Aaron said, be prepared. You know, watch the weather forecast. You know, it might be 30 degrees on Friday when everybody comes home and everybody's running out, but if you're looking at the forecast, it might be 5 degrees or less on Sunday, and that can cause a bad event if we're not plugging units in or preparing properly. You know, it's because it's nice on Friday, the driver isn't thinking about plugging his truck in and stuff, but it's going to be 5 degrees on Sunday. So we just want to, you know, pay a little bit of attention. On the really cold weekends, it's always best to have somebody come in on Sunday, start all the vehicles, warm up the batteries, warm up the fuel a little bit to make sure there aren't going to be any problems on Monday. And it's a lot easier to get the trucks running on Sunday when you're not up against a time crunch, getting your deliveries out on that Monday morning. If it does get bitterly cold out, what a lot of reefer fleets will do is they'll just start the reefer because it doesn't use as much fuel over the weekend. That will keep the batteries charged and keep the fuel moving. The more the fuel moves, the less it's going to gel. And of course, if your driver does a quality post trip at the end of his day and reports those defects at the end of the shift so they can be repaired before dispatch the next morning, that can prevent a lot of delays instead of coming in the next morning and finding the problem and, you know, in a cold weather morning, and prevent having delays. immediately before the trip starts.
So hopefully your dash doesn't light up quite like this center graphic does, but extreme weather can compound all kinds of maintenance issues. So any early indicators such as check engine lights, manufacturer indicator lights, ABS lights, those need to be addressed timely, especially during the cold weather. Report these right away to your regular service department during our operating hours, and then around the clock all year long, our road rescue department is there to serve you, whether on your parking lot or out in the road.
And, we just went through a whole bunch of things that you can do to help prevent delays in the wintertime. We like to provide a winterization to our customers. So every year, every unit that AIM's under contract with, we do one special last check before winter to make sure the unit's good to go. We'll look at the batteries, we'll load test every one of them, we'll clean every ground on the unit to make sure the unit has the ability to crank well. We'll check those block heaters, make sure they work properly, before you start plugging them in. We'll look at the air dryer and make sure the heater element works in it so that it is removing as much moisture as possible to prevent any type of transmission issues or something might go along those lines. Any auxiliary heater units that may be on your unit, like an S-bar or Webasto heater, we'll check all those out, make sure they're good to go. And obviously the simple things like checking your coolant protection level and the basics. It's just one added step, just one last good solid look at the equipment before winter to make sure it's ready to go for you.
That's all we have from a presentation standpoint. We'd be happy to take any questions if you have any at this time.
Oh, there's a typed in question, Aaron, if you just want to click on that orange box.
Right. So someone has asked, how do we verify that a block heater is working? Great question. And to Chris's point, from an operator standpoint, the best thing that you can do is make sure that your receptacle and cord is operational. Anything block heater testing, we'd have to terminate the end of that to test the block heater itself. So that's something we'd need to do at our shop.
And one thing, because it's such a high amp draw, 1500 watts, when you plug it in, most times you'll hear like a little crackle. Like, you can hear that electricity start to flow when you plug it in, just like a small snap. It's nothing, it just happens real quick, but it's just an audible thing the driver can listen for. If he hears that little bit of a snap when he's plugging it in, that'll tell him that it's working, because you got high amps hitting resistance immediately, so there's just a quick snap when you do plug it in. It appears everybody's unmuted, so if there's any questions out there, we may have another question.
We'll have a recorded version of this that I'll be happy to send to you. So following this webinar, I'm going to shoot out a quick survey just to it's very short, just to gauge how you guys like this, if there was anything additional you wanted to hear. There's going to be an attachment on it that will be our Operation Snowflake material, which is just our best advice for preparing for winter conditions. And I will include a recording of this video. It's just a link, you can click on it, it'll open in your web browser and you can view the video as this session just occurred.
In addition to that, I would encourage you, and I'm not sure if you've received our winter letter that gets distributed each year. I assume that's either this week or next. But we encourage you to reach out to your representative for any additional needs that you'd have. We could go into more detail about items that are specific to your fleet, or custom tailor a driver's meeting for your fleet.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do a driver's meeting for your drivers and go through all the quick points to make sure everybody's understands what we need to do.
So all of our customers will be receiving a letter from us, which went out on Thursday. So some of you may have already gotten it if you're local to Youngstown. This letter is a detail of kind of what these gentlemen just reviewed, as well as a couple other items. That's also going out via email this week. So as long as we have a valid email address for you, you'll get that. You guys all got this invitation from my email address. So if there is anything that comes up after this that you have any questions, I'm happy to direct you to either of these gentlemen, and they can help you with that further too.
Anything else?
Any other questions?
It's a quiet group.
All right, well, thank you all for your time. Again, look for an email from me here in the next half an hour, and if you could complete the short survey, that'll help us make these sessions more productive. We conduct one of these a month, and they're all on relevant topics of fleet maintenance. So thank you for joining me. Hope you can join in the future. Chris and Aaron, thank you both so much for your time and expertise. We couldn't do it without you.
Thank you very much.
So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.